In 1999, a homeless man broke into a tomb in Edinburgh, seeking shelter from a storm. What he found inside would trigger hundreds of violent attacks over the next 2 decades. Scratches, bruises, broken bones, and even death. In Chicago, drivers have been picking up the same hitchhiker for over 80 years. A beautiful blonde woman in a white dress who vanishes into thin air. And in Illinois, a photograph taken in broad daylight captured something sitting on a gravestone that wasn't there just seconds before. These aren't campfire stories. These aren't urban legends. These are documented cases with physical evidence, witness testimonies, and police reports. I'm talking about the most haunted graveyards on Earth, places where the boundary between the living and the dead has worn dangerously thin. Today, we're diving into 7 terrifying true stories about haunted graveyards. Stories with evidence so compelling that even skeptics can't explain them away. But I have to warn you, some of these accounts involve physical attacks on visitors. So if you're watching this alone at night, maybe turn on a few extra lights. Let's begin.
Before continuing to watch the video, please subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Thank you for watching The Witch's Book, Dark Tales.
Story 1. Greyfriars Kirkyard, the Mackenzie Poltergeist. Our first location takes us to Edinburgh, Scotland, a city already famous for its dark history of witch burnings and underground vaults. But within this ancient city lies Greyfriars Kirkyard, home to what paranormal experts call the most conclusive supernatural case of all time. This is the lair of the Mackenzie Poltergeist. Greyfriars Kirkyard was established in 1562 when the city's previous cemetery became overcrowded. The name comes from a Franciscan friary whose monks wore gray habits. For centuries, it served as a peaceful burial ground for Edinburgh's residents. But in 1679, everything changed. That year, over 1,200 Scottish Presbyterians called Covenanters were imprisoned in a section of the graveyard after the Battle of Bothwell Bridge. These men were held under the orders of Sir George Mackenzie of Rosehaw, the King's Lord Advocate. Mackenzie earned the nickname Bloody Mackenzie for his brutal treatment of these prisoners. The conditions were inhumane beyond imagination. These men were forced to endure Scotland's coldest winter months with minimal shelter and almost no food. Many died from exposure and malnutrition. Those who didn't die were either executed or sold into slavery. Their only way out was to swear allegiance to the king, something their religious convictions would not allow them to do. The irony: these tortured souls were buried in the very same graveyard where their tormentor, George Mackenzie, would later be interred in a grand mausoleum after his death in 1691. For over 300 years, there were no reports of paranormal activity at Greyfriars Kirkyard. Then came 1999. On a stormy night, a homeless man broke into Mackenzie's mausoleum seeking shelter from the brutal weather. As he explored the tomb in the darkness, the floor suddenly gave way beneath him. He fell through into a hidden chamber below, a chamber filled with decomposing corpses. The man fled in terror, but something else awakened that night. Within weeks of the break-in, visitors to Greyfriars Kirkyard began reporting strange occurrences. But these weren't subtle experiences. People were being physically attacked by an unseen force. Between 1999 and 2006, over 350 documented cases of violent poltergeist attacks were recorded. And we're not talking about feeling cold or hearing strange noises. Visitors were being scratched, bitten, pushed, and beaten. People passed out unconscious. One person even suffered a broken limb. The attacks occurred primarily near 2 locations: Mackenzie's mausoleum, known as the Black Mausoleum, and the nearby Dundas Mausoleum, in what's now called the Covenanters' Prison. The victims reported fresh scratches appearing under their clothing, marks that looked like they came from sharp fingernails. Some described feeling an overwhelming sense of malevolence, like pure evil pressing down on them. The Edinburgh City Council eventually locked the Covenanters' prison section, sealing it off from public access. But that didn't stop the attacks. In 2000, concerned authorities called in spiritualist medium Colin Grant to perform an exorcism. Grant entered the mausoleum with journalists as witnesses, confident he could cleanse the location. He didn't last long. Grant collapsed halfway through the ritual and had to be carried out by his son. He told witnesses, "It's too strong. It will kill me." The exorcism was abandoned. Just 1 week later, while conducting a private reading for a client, Colin Grant suffered a heart attack and died. The area was exorcised a second time. It failed again. Tour guide Jamie Korstorfine, who works for City of the Dead Tours, the only company with permission to enter the sealed area, has documented 3 personal encounters with the entity. He describes the scratches victims receive as cat-like and emphasizes they weren't sore and certainly were not human. The company's founder, Jan Andrew Henderson, lived in a house in the graveyard directly across from the Covenanters' prison while researching the phenomenon. He started the tours specifically to investigate the entity and document witness accounts. Henderson kept meticulous records of every reported attack, photograph, and statement. But in a bizarre twist, both his house and the tour company offices, which overlooked the graveyard, burned down in separate fires. The fires destroyed years of evidence about the Mackenzie poltergeist. No surrounding properties were damaged, and an official cause was never established. As Henderson himself stated, "I don't know what the Mackenzie poltergeist really is. I don't know if it's a supernatural entity, a pheromone cloud, a demon, or a set of psychosomatic and hysterical reactions. But it has become the best documented supernatural case of all time, as well as the most conclusive." Let me put it this way. If the Mackenzie poltergeist isn't a genuine supernatural entity, then I don't think there's any such thing. The attacks haven't stopped. Just days ago, in October 2025, a visitor to the Kirkyard reported fresh scratches on their arm after entering the area. Tour guides continue to witness people collapsing, experiencing sudden temperature drops, and finding unexplained marks on their bodies after visiting the site. As of 2025, there have been over 500 documented reports of the poltergeist assaulting visitors, making this the most actively haunted location with ongoing physical evidence anywhere in the world. The question remains, is it the vengeful spirit of Bloody Mackenzie? The tortured souls of the Covenanters? Or something even more sinister? Whatever haunts Greyfriars Kirkyard, one thing is certain. It's still there, and it's still dangerous. Story 2. Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. The Madonna in White. About 25 miles southwest of Chicago, hidden down a trail through the Rubio Woods Forest Preserve, sits a small 1-acre cemetery that paranormal investigators call the most haunted cemetery in Illinois. This is Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, and it's home to over 100 documented paranormal experiences, including one of the most famous ghost photographs ever taken. Bachelor's Grove Cemetery is the oldest cemetery in Cook County, Illinois. The area was originally settled by English, Irish, Scottish, and German immigrants in the early 1820s. The cemetery was established around 1838, with the first recorded burial in 1844. The name is a double reference, both to an influential family in the original settlement and to a group of unmarried men who lived in the area. For over a century, it served as a peaceful burial ground for the local community. But by the 1950s, burials had stopped. The cemetery, now isolated and forgotten, became a target for vandals and thrill-seekers. Headstones were stolen, broken, or thrown into the nearby murky pond. Graves were desecrated. Of the more than 200 burials that took place here, fewer than 80 graves still have markers. Paranormal activity at Bachelor's Grove has been reported since the 1950s, but it intensified dramatically in the 1970s when ghost hunters began investigating the location. What makes this cemetery unique is the sheer variety of phenomena reported here. One of the earliest and most frequently reported phenomena is the appearance of a phantom farmhouse. Witnesses describe a white, two-story Victorian house with a porch swing and a small picket fence. The house appears to glow with a yellow-orange light in the windows, flickering as if lit by candles. Multiple witnesses have reported identical descriptions. In 1987, during a WLS television broadcast, Illinois resident Ted Visnek described his encounter with the Phantom House in vivid detail. Others have reported seeing the structure shimmer and float before vanishing completely as they approach. The house supposedly dates to the 1850s-1890s era. Some accounts describe a light on the second floor, wooden pillars by the porch, and that distinctive swing, but here's what makes it truly bizarre. There's no record of any house ever standing at that location in the cemetery. But the cemetery's most famous haunting involves a photograph that would make headlines across America. In 1991, paranormal researcher Judy Huff Fells visited Bachelor's Grove with her investigation team during daylight hours. The group was taking photographs throughout the cemetery using infrared film. When Fells reviewed the photos, she noticed something extraordinary in one image. Sitting on a gravestone was the translucent figure of a young woman wearing what appeared to be a white hooded robe or dress. The woman had a soft, glowing appearance and seemed to be looking directly at the camera. Here's the chilling part. Felds had taken multiple photos of that exact gravestone just seconds before. None of the other photos showed anyone sitting there. No one in the group had seen any person near that headstone during their visit. The photograph was published in the Chicago Sun-Times and later in the National Examiner. It became one of the most widely circulated ghost photographs in history. To this day, skeptics have been unable to definitively debunk the image. The woman in the photograph became known as the Madonna of Bachelor's Grove, or the White Lady. Legend says she's searching for something or someone, though what she seeks has never been identified. Some theorize she's looking for her baby. Others believe she's a grieving mother searching for a lost child. Her identity remains a mystery. The first documented appearance of the White Lady occurred in 1979, when a group of amateur ghost hunters captured another photograph of a similar figure dressed in white, carrying what appeared to be an infant in her arms. This image, taken 12 years before Fells's famous photograph, suggests the woman in white has been manifesting at Bachelor's Grove for at least 4 decades. But the Madonna isn't the only spirit haunting this cemetery. Visitors have reported glowing orbs of light floating among the gravestones, particularly near the pond. A phantom black dog that appears and disappears. A phantom horse and rider galloping through the cemetery. The appearance of figures in old-fashioned clothing that vanish when approached. Cold spots that move through the cemetery. Electronic equipment malfunctions. Cameras stopping, watches freezing, and phones dying despite full batteries, audio anomalies, and unexplained voices. The sensation of being watched or followed. In 2003, Pete Krapia, organizer of the Grove Restoration Project, may have captured a second ghost photograph at Bachelor's Grove. While photographing the graveyard, he saw something out of the corner of his eye, a yellowish figure among the graves. When he reviewed his photos, one image appeared to show a humanoid yellow figure. Krapia later learned about a lesser-known Bachelor's Grove ghost called the Yellow Man, an entity rarely reported but supposedly seen by witnesses over the decades. The fact that Krapia captured the image without prior knowledge of this specific ghost lends credibility to his account. Brian Danko, a 65-year-old transportation worker, described his encounter. This one appeared as a quite large white glowing sphere. I had verbal contact with the apparition in the cemetery. Freelance artist Jen LaRue, who has visited Bachelor's Grove multiple times, says, "I love Bachelor's Grove. It is one of my favorite haunts. It's one of my favorite places to walk and just go for my own peace of mind." LaRue's experience has been peaceful rather than frightening, suggesting the spirits here may not be malevolent, just active. Adding to the cemetery's dark mystique is the persistent rumor that during Prohibition, gangsters, possibly connected to Al Capone, used the isolated pond next to the cemetery to dump the bodies of their victims. While this has never been proven, the pond eased murky waters and the cemetery's remote location in the 1920s-30s would have made it an ideal spot for such activities. Today, Bachelor's Grove is surrounded by chain-link fencing, and police strictly enforce trespassing laws. The cemetery is officially open only from dawn to dusk. Despite, or perhaps because of, its reputation as Illinois' most haunted location, paranormal investigators from around the world continue to seek access to the site. Dale Kaczmarek, founder of the Ghost Research Society, has conducted over 30 investigations at Bachelor's Grove since 1977. He maintains detailed records of paranormal activity at the site and believes the ghost stories have actually helped preserve what remains of the cemetery. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the photographic evidence from Bachelor's Grove is difficult to dismiss, and the consistency of witness accounts over 70-plus years suggests something unusual is happening in this forgotten acre of land in the Chicago suburbs. Story 3. Resurrection Cemetery. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. If you're driving down Archer Avenue in Justice, Illinois, late at night, you might see a beautiful young woman in a white ball gown walking along the roadside. If you're kind enough to stop and offer her a ride, she'll accept. She'll sit quietly in your back seat, barely speaking. But when you reach Resurrection Cemetery, she'll vanish, right through your closed car door. This is Resurrection Mary, Chicago's most famous ghost and one of the most documented vanishing hitchhiker cases in history. But what makes this story truly terrifying is the physical evidence she left behind. The most widely accepted version of Mary's story begins in the late 1920s. A young woman attended a dance at the O. Henry Ballroom in Willow Springs, a popular spot during the Jazz Age. She got into an argument with her boyfriend and stormed out into the night, deciding to walk home alone along Archer Avenue. Somewhere between the ballroom and Resurrection Cemetery, a car struck and killed her. The driver never stopped. It was a hit and run. The young woman was buried in Resurrection Cemetery, wearing the white ball gown she'd worn to the dance. But death, it seems, didn't stop her from trying to get home. The first documented encounter occurred in 1939. A man named Jerry Palace attended a dance at the Liberty Grove Ballroom, also called the O. Henry Ballroom. There, he met a beautiful blonde woman in a white dress. They danced together all evening. Palace noticed something odd about his dance partner. She felt unusually cold to the touch. But she was charming and attractive, so he didn't think much of it. At the end of the night, he offered her a ride home. She accepted and climbed into his car. As they drove, she gave him an address on Chicago's South Side. But then, as they approached Resurrection Cemetery, she suddenly pointed toward the gates and said, "I have to get out here." Before Palace could respond, the woman vanished. She didn't open the car door. She didn't step out. She simply disappeared, while the car was still moving. Shaken and confused, Palace drove to the address she'd given him the next morning. When a woman answered the door, he asked about the young lady he'd met the night before. The woman's face went pale. "That sounds like my daughter," she said, "but my daughter died 5 years ago." She showed Palace a photograph. It was the same woman he'd danced with, the woman who had vanished from his car. The 1930s through 1950s brought scattered reports of a young woman in white being seen near Resurrection Cemetery. Some witnesses described her walking along Archer Avenue. Others reported seeing her hitchhiking. A few claimed to have given her rides, only for her to disappear. But it was in the 1970s that the sightings of Resurrection Mary exploded into the public consciousness. In 1973, a cab driver walked into Chet's Melody Lounge, a bar directly across from Resurrection Cemetery on Archer Avenue. He wanted to know if anyone had seen a young woman in a white dress. She'd gotten into his cab asking for a ride, but then disappeared without paying her fare. When he turned around to collect payment, she was simply gone, and the cab door had never opened. Later that same decade, another cab driver reported picking up a hitchhiker near the cemetery. She was a young woman in her early 20s, wearing a white dress. She asked to be taken to a specific address. But as they drove past Resurrection Cemetery, she vanished from the back seat. The driver was so disturbed that he immediately drove to the police station to report what had happened. Police investigated but found no evidence of any passenger ever being in the vehicle. But the most compelling evidence came in August 1976. A man driving down Archer Avenue late at night noticed a young woman standing inside Resurrection Cemetery. This struck him as odd. The cemetery was closed and the gates were locked. The woman appeared to be gripping the iron bars of the gate from the inside, as if trying to escape. Concerned, the driver contacted police immediately. When officers arrived at the scene minutes later, there was no one there. The cemetery was empty, but something else was there. 2 of the iron bars on the front gate had been bent apart, with perfect handprints burned into the metal. The marks showed clear impressions of skin texture, fingerprints, and what appeared to be scorch marks, as if the metal had been seared by intense heat. Officials at Resurrection Cemetery claimed the damage was caused by a maintenance truck. But Dale Kaczmarek, founder of the Ghost Research Society, examined the bars personally and photographed them extensively. He maintained that the damage pattern was inconsistent with vehicular impact. This was reported back in August of 1976 by a man that was traveling down Archer Avenue and saw a girl currently locked in the cemetery after hours. Kaczmarek explained, when a police officer responded to the call, he found the bars pulled apart and bent at a weird angle. The bent bars with the mysterious handprints remained on the cemetery gate for decades, attracting curious visitors and paranormal investigators. However, in recent years, cemetery officials removed that section of the fence entirely, perhaps tired of the attention, or perhaps because the evidence was too compelling. The Ghost Research Society has documented dozens of additional sightings. In August 1980 alone, dozens of people reportedly saw Mary during a single weekend. Less than a week later, a man named Tony picked up a young woman hitchhiking near the Red Barrel restaurant on Archer Avenue. He even joked with her, "You look like Resurrection Mary, but I know there's no such thing as Resurrection Mary." She didn't respond. Minutes later, she vanished from his vehicle. Some of the most disturbing reports involve drivers who believe they've struck Mary with their vehicles. Multiple witnesses have called police in panic, reporting that they'd hit a young woman in a white dress on Archer Avenue. They describe seeing her body on the side of the road. But by the time police arrive, there's no body, only an indentation in the grass shaped exactly like a human form. Other drivers report even more chilling experiences. They see Mary standing in the middle of Archer Avenue at night. They slam on their brakes, certain they're about to hit her. But instead of impact, their car passes right through her translucent form. As recently as 2005, a Lithuanian-language newspaper called Vakarai documented a sighting at the Willowbrook Ballroom, formerly the O. Henry Ballroom. A wedding guest met a young woman at the reception and danced with her. She introduced herself as Mary. At the end of the night, he offered her a ride home. She accepted. As they drove down Archer Avenue toward Resurrection Cemetery, she disappeared, just as she had done dozens of times before over the previous 70+ years. Who was Mary? Researchers have attempted to identify Resurrection Mary for decades. The 2 leading candidates are Mary Bregovi, killed in an automobile accident in 1934 and buried at Resurrection Cemetery. However, she was brunette. Most witnesses describe Mary as blonde, and her accident occurred in downtown Chicago, not near Archer Avenue. Anna Maria Norkus, a 12-year-old Polish girl who went by Mary and died in a car accident in 1927 while returning from the O. Henry Ballroom. She was blonde and died on the route between the ballroom and where her family lived. Some claim her remains may have been temporarily interred at Resurrection Cemetery during a gravedigger's strike and later mislaid. However, witnesses consistently describe Mary as being 18 to 21 years old, not 12. This discrepancy has never been resolved. To this day, reports of Resurrection Mary continue. Drivers along Archer Avenue still occasionally report seeing a young woman in white. Chet's Melody Lounge, the bar across from the cemetery, serves a Bloody Mary at the end of the bar every Sunday, left there for Mary in case she ever stops in. Resurrection Cemetery, which encompasses over 540 acres, has removed Mary Bregovi's headstone and cut out the sections of the gate with the mysterious handprints. But the legend persists. Chicago paranormal investigator Richard Crowe spent decades researching Resurrection Mary before his death. He interviewed over 36 credible witnesses who reported encounters with the ghost. His conclusion: if Resurrection Mary isn't real, then no ghost is. For over 85 years, this vanishing hitchhiker has been seen by credible witnesses, cab drivers, police officers, everyday citizens. The physical evidence of the burned handprints, though now removed, was documented by multiple investigators. Whether Resurrection Mary is the ghost of Mary Bregovi, Anna Norkus, or some other tragic victim, one thing is certain: something supernatural haunts that stretch of Archer Avenue, and she's still looking for a ride home. Story 4. Stull Cemetery, the gateway to hell. In the small town of Stull, Kansas, population 20, sits a cemetery that has been called one of the 7 gateways to hell. Urban legends claim the devil himself appears here twice a year. The stories became so prevalent that in the 1990s, police had to barricade the roads leading to the cemetery on Halloween night because thousands of curiosity seekers descended on this tiny town. But what's the truth behind these terrifying tales? And why has this rural cemetery attracted such dark attention? The most famous legend associated with Stull Cemetery claims that Satan personally visits the location twice a year, on Halloween night and during the spring equinox. According to the stories, these visits occur at midnight in the ruins of an old abandoned church that once stood next to the graveyard. The legend gained national attention in 1974 when an article was published in the University of Kansas student newspaper stating that the devil visited Stull on these specific dates. The article claimed that Stull was one of the 7 portals to hell scattered across the earth. At the center of the legend stood an old limestone church, built in the 1860s and abandoned decades ago. The church's roof had collapsed, leaving only the stone walls standing. According to local lore, this church had supernatural properties. Witnesses claimed that even during the worst Kansas storms, rain would never fall inside the ruined church, as if an invisible barrier protected the interior. Some reported that if you stood inside the church ruins at midnight, you would hear strange sounds and feel an overwhelming sense of dread. Others claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving through the ruins when no one was physically present. While the devil legends are likely exaggerated, visitors to Stull Cemetery have reported genuinely strange experiences: memory lapses. Multiple witnesses describe arriving at the cemetery with clear memories of driving there, only to find themselves back in their cars with no memory of the previous hour or more. Time seems to skip forward without explanation. Physical sensations. Visitors report sudden feelings of intense fear or nausea when approaching certain areas of the cemetery, particularly near where the church once stood. Electronic malfunctions. Cameras, phones, and car electronics frequently malfunction near the cemetery. Batteries drain instantly. Vehicles that worked perfectly before entering the area suddenly won't start. Unexplained sounds. Witnesses report hearing whispers, screams, and what sounds like chanting coming from the cemetery when no one else is present. Beyond the sensationalized devil legends, Stull Cemetery does have a documented dark history. The town was originally called Deer Creek until a series of tragic deaths in the 1850s, 1860s led residents to rename it Stull, possibly derived from skull. The cemetery contains the graves of several individuals who died under mysterious or tragic circumstances. The area also has a long history of reported occult activity. For over a century, locals have whispered about strange rituals being performed in the cemetery at night. By the 1980s and 1990s, Stull Cemetery had become infamous. Every Halloween, thousands of people, college students, paranormal investigators, curiosity seekers, would descend on this tiny Kansas town, overwhelming the local population of 20 residents. The situation became so problematic that police began setting up barricades on the roads leading to Stull on Halloween night. Officers would check IDs and turn away anyone who wasn't a resident. Trespassing penalties were increased. The cemetery was closed to the public on Halloween and the spring equinox. In 2002, the property owners made a controversial decision. They demolished the church ruins entirely, bulldozing the stone walls that had stood for over 140 years. The official reason? Liability concerns and the constant trespassing. But some locals whispered a different explanation. The owners wanted to end the paranormal activity for good. Remove the structure, remove the gateway. It didn't work. Even after the church was destroyed, witnesses continued reporting strange phenomena at Stull Cemetery. The memory lapses persisted. Electronic equipment still malfunctioned. And every Halloween, despite police barriers, determined visitors still found ways to reach the cemetery. So, what's really happening at Stull Cemetery? Most paranormal researchers believe the devil legends are exaggerations. Urban legends that spiraled out of control thanks to the 1974 newspaper article and subsequent media attention. The claim that Pope John Paul II ordered his plane to fly around Kansas to avoid flying over Stull has been thoroughly debunked. However, the consistent reports of electronic malfunctions, memory lapses, and feelings of dread suggest something unusual may be occurring at the location. These phenomena align with other locations associated with limestone structures. Limestone is believed by some researchers to hold or amplify certain types of energy. The area's documented history of occult activity is also significant. When a location is repeatedly used for dark rituals over many years, some paranormal researchers believe it can create a thin place, a location where the barrier between our world and others becomes permeable. Today, Stull Cemetery is strictly off-limits to the public except for those visiting family graves. The property is private, heavily monitored, and aggressively prosecuted for trespassing. Security cameras were installed, and police regularly patrol the area. The church ruins are gone, bulldozed into memory, but the legends remain. And every Halloween, despite all the barriers, a few determined souls still make the pilgrimage to this remote Kansas cemetery, searching for the gateway to hell. Whether they find it or not, well, those who return don't like to talk about it. Story 5. Highgate Cemetery. The Highgate Vampire. In North London, carved into a hillside, lies one of the most beautiful and haunting Victorian cemeteries in the world. Highgate Cemetery is the final resting place of Karl Marx, George Eliot, and members of the Dickens family. But this cemetery, its most famous resident, isn't buried there at all. It walks among the graves at night. This is the story of the Highgate Vampire and the mass hysteria that gripped London in the 1970s. By the early 1800s, London's population had exploded past 1 million people. The city's old churchyard cemeteries were grotesquely overcrowded. Bodies were buried in shallow graves and quickly covered with lime. Some were crammed between shops and outside taverns. The stench and disease were unbearable. In response, Parliament authorized the construction of 7 private cemeteries in the countryside around London. They became known as the Magnificent Seven. Highgate Cemetery, opened in 1839, was designed to be a beautiful, peaceful, eternal resting place. The architecture was stunning. Egyptian-style tombs, elaborate Gothic mausoleums, and the famous Circle of Lebanon, a ring of catacombs built around an ancient cedar tree. Everyone who was anyone in Victorian London wanted to be buried at Highgate. But by the turn of the 20th century, Highgate's fortunes changed. The cemetery fell into disrepair. Maintenance ceased. Nature began reclaiming the grounds. Tombs cracked open. Vegetation overtook the paths. The once beautiful cemetery became a gothic nightmare of crumbling stone and invading plant life. And then, the stories began. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, multiple witnesses reported seeing a tall, dark figure gliding through Highgate Cemetery at night. The entity was described as being over 7 feet tall, with hypnotic, glowing red eyes. It wore dark robes and seemed to float rather than walk. Those who encountered it reported feeling an overwhelming sense of terror. Animals in the vicinity would panic. Dogs would refuse to enter certain areas, birds would fall silent, and cats would flee. Several witnesses claimed they felt the entity trying to take control of their minds. Most disturbingly, dead foxes began appearing on the cemetery grounds, dozens of them, completely drained of blood. According to researchers, the vampire's origin story traced back to medieval Romania. The entity was supposedly a nobleman who practiced black magic and dark occult rituals. When he died, his followers had his coffin transported from Romania to England in the 18th century. He was buried at the site that would later become Highgate Cemetery. For over a century, he slumbered peacefully in his tomb. But then, according to the legend, Satanists performing rituals in the cemetery during the 1960s accidentally awakened him. The dark magic of their ceremonies disturbed his rest and gave him power to manifest once again. In 1970, 2 men, Sean Manchester and David Farrant, independently began investigating the Highgate vampire. Both claimed to have encountered the entity. Both conducted their own research into the cemetery's haunting. Their rivalry became famous and at times absurd, with each claiming to be the true authority on the vampire. They accused each other of sensationalism, held competing press conferences, and even challenged each other to public debates. Manchester claimed to have finally staked and destroyed the vampire in the early 1970s, driving a stake through its heart in a secret ceremony. But sightings of the dark figure continued. On Friday, March 13, 1970, the vampire story exploded into the mainstream. A television news crew visited Highgate Cemetery to investigate the claims. The broadcast sparked massive public interest. That very night, hundreds of people descended on the cemetery, climbing over the walls and rushing through the grounds with crosses, stakes, and flashlights. They were hunting the vampire. The scene was chaos. A mob of amateur vampire hunters trampling graves and disturbing tombs. Police had to intervene to disperse the crowds and protect the cemetery from further damage. Beyond the sensationalized vampire stories, Highgate Cemetery has been the site of numerous documented paranormal experiences. The Mad Old Woman. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing an elderly woman frantically searching through graves, pulling at stones and digging with her hands. When approached, she vanishes. The face in the gate. People walking past the main gate at night have reported seeing a pale, skull-like face peering out at them from between the bars. When they investigate, nothing is there. The sudden temperature drops. Visitors experience dramatic temperature plunges in specific areas of the cemetery. Drops of 20-30 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds, even on warm days. The presence. A common report involves feeling watched or followed while walking through certain sections. Some witnesses describe feeling hands touching their shoulders or hair, only to turn and find no one there. Clock stoppages. Watches and clocks frequently stop working when people enter specific areas of the cemetery, particularly near older mausoleums. The time displayed when they stop? Often midnight exactly. Several people who ventured into Highgate at night reported being physically affected by their experiences. One woman claimed she was attacked by an unseen force that left scratches on her neck. Multiple witnesses reported feeling suddenly weak and drained after encountering the dark figure, as if their energy had been siphoned away. Some described experiencing vivid nightmares for weeks after visiting the cemetery. Nightmares where the tall figure would appear at the foot of their beds. Today, Highgate Cemetery is split into 2 sections. The older, western section requires a guided tour to enter and is carefully maintained by the Friends of Highgate Cemetery Trust. The eastern section, where Karl Marx is buried, is open to the public during daylight hours. Night access is strictly forbidden. The cemetery has embraced its spooky reputation, offering theatrical tours and Halloween events. But even the tour guides will tell you, strange things still happen at Highgate. Tour operators report electronic equipment malfunctions in certain areas. Photographers capture unexplained mists and shadows in their images. And occasionally, a visitor will see something that makes them leave quickly and never return. As for the Highgate vampire, no one has reported a clear sighting in recent years, but dead foxes still occasionally appear on the grounds, completely drained of blood. And late at night, security guards sometimes report seeing a tall, dark shadow moving among the graves. A shadow that disappears when they investigate. The vampire may be gone, or it may simply be waiting. Story 6. St. Louis Cemetery, number 1. The Voodoo Queen's Curse. In the heart of New Orleans, where voodoo and Catholicism have intertwined for centuries, stands St. Louis Cemetery number 1, one of the oldest cemeteries in America. Here, 100,000 bodies rest in above-ground tombs stacked like apartments for the dead. But one grave receives more visitors than all the others combined: the tomb of Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. And those who disrespect her grave have paid dearly for it. Marie Laveau was born in New Orleans in 1794, or possibly 1801. Records conflict. She became the most powerful voodoo priestess in the city's history, practicing a unique blend of West African voodoo, Catholicism, and indigenous spirituality. By the mid-1800s, Laveau's influence in New Orleans was extraordinary. She worked as a hairdresser to wealthy white families, which gave her access to their secrets. She used this information, combined with her genuine spiritual practices, to build a reputation as someone who could solve any problem, for a price. People came to her for love spells, curses on enemies, financial success, and protection. Even judges and politicians reportedly consulted her. Her voodoo ceremonies on the banks of Lake Pontchartrain attracted hundreds of participants, both black and white, in an era when such mixing was extremely rare. Marie Laveau died in 1881, though some claim she lived until 1897. Her daughter, also named Marie Laveau, continued her work. She was buried in St. Louis Cemetery number 1, in the Glapian family tomb. A legend grew around Marie Laveau's grave. To have a wish granted, you must draw 3 X's on her tomb with red brick or chalk. Turn around 3 times. Knock on the tomb 3 times. State your wish aloud. If your wish is granted, return to the tomb, circle the X's, and leave an offering. For decades, thousands of people performed this ritual. The tomb became covered in X marks, layers upon layers of red marks scratched and drawn on the whitewashed surface. But there was always a warning. Disrespect Marie Laveau at your own peril. Those who mocked the ritual, vandalized the tomb, or failed to return with offerings after their wishes were granted, reported experiencing terrible misfortune. The stories are numerous. A tourist who spray-painted obscene graffiti on the tomb was in a serious car accident the next day. He survived but was hospitalized for months. A woman who carved her initials deep into the tomb reportedly lost her job. Her relationship ended, and she developed a mysterious illness, all within a month of her visit. A man who urinated on the grave while drunk claimed that for weeks afterward, he felt like he was being followed by an unseen presence. Objects in his house would move on their own. He would wake up with scratches on his body that he couldn't explain. Multiple witnesses have reported feeling violently ill immediately after disrespecting the tomb, overwhelming nausea and dizziness that vanished as soon as they left the cemetery. Beyond the curse, many visitors to St. Louis Cemetery number 1 have reported paranormal experiences. Apparition, sightings. A tall woman in a white dress and red tignon, head wrap, has been seen walking among the tombs. When approached, she disappears. Witnesses believe this is Marie Laveau herself, still watching over her kingdom. Disembodied voices. Visitors report hearing singing, chanting, and speaking in languages they don't recognize. Sounds that seem to come from nowhere. Temperature anomalies. Despite New Orleans' humid heat, certain areas of the cemetery experience sudden cold spots that make breath visible. Phantom drumming. The sound of drums, like those used in voodoo ceremonies, has been heard echoing through the cemetery when no source can be found. By the 2010s, Marie Laveau's tomb was in terrible condition. Decades of tourists marking it with X's had damaged the historic structure. The plaster was crumbling. The brick underneath was deteriorating. In 2013, the Archdiocese of New Orleans restricted access to St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Visitors could only enter as part of a licensed tour group. The tomb was restored, the X marks were cleaned off, and signage was posted warning against vandalism. But people still found ways to mark the tomb. In 2014, a woman was arrested and charged with criminal damage after being caught on camera carving deep marks into the freshly restored structure. Marie Laveau isn't the only spirit said to haunt St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Henry Vince. His ghost has been reported near the tomb of his unfaithful wife. According to legend, he caught her with her lover and killed them both before taking his own life. His angry spirit supposedly lingers, reliving that tragic night. The Phantom Funeral. Multiple witnesses have described seeing a funeral procession moving through the cemetery, complete with mourners dressed in period clothing and a horse-drawn hearse. As witnesses approach, the entire procession fades away. The Crying Baby. Visitors report hearing the sound of a baby crying, particularly near the area where yellow fever victims were buried in mass graves. Today, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 is protected by strict rules. Visitors must be part of a licensed tour group. The cemetery gates are locked when tours aren't present. Security cameras monitor the grounds, and anyone caught vandalizing Marie Laveau's tomb faces criminal charges and hefty fines. But the protection may be too late. Some believe that the decades of disrespectful treatment have awakened something in the cemetery, something that doesn't distinguish between those who show respect and those who do not. Marie Laveau's power, it seems, extends far beyond the grave. And in New Orleans, where the boundary between the living world and the spirit world has always been thin, her influence may be stronger now than it ever was in life. Story 7. Colonial Park Cemetery. Voices in the Dark. Our final story takes us to Savannah, Georgia, a city so haunted it's earned the nickname, the city that lives upon her dead. And nowhere is that more literal than Colonial Park Cemetery, where over 10,000 bodies are buried beneath just 6 acres of land. Most disturbing of all, many of the roads surrounding the cemetery are built directly over unmarked graves. But what makes Colonial Park truly terrifying isn't just the number of dead, it's what happens to those who visit after dark. Colonial Park Cemetery was established in 1750 during British colonization. It's the oldest intact cemetery in Savannah, originally serving as the burial ground for Christ Church Parish before opening to all residents in 1789. For over a century, Colonial Park served as Savannah's primary public cemetery. But the city's history is soaked in tragedy, and those tragedies are buried in this ground. In January 1820, a fire broke out in Savannah and reached a stable where gunpowder had been illegally stored. The explosion destroyed 2/3 of the city overnight. As summer approached, standing water from the unrepaired damage created perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes carrying yellow fever. What followed was a nightmare. Nearly 700 Savannahans died from yellow fever that year and were buried in Colonial Park Cemetery in mass graves. Some historians claim the actual number was 666, but it was rounded up to 700 to avoid mentioning the number of the beast. The disease was so contagious that no one wanted to touch the infected bodies. Most of the visible tombs in Colonial Park go down about 12 feet, with shelves on both sides. Tomb keepers would crawl inside to receive bodies and place them on shelves before sealing the tomb. But during the yellow fever outbreak, families would die in rapid succession. When relatives returned to place a new body in the family tomb, they would sometimes discover scratch marks on the inside of the door, evidence that someone had been buried alive and tried desperately to escape. Those scratch marks can still be seen on some tombs today. Colonial Park Cemetery closed to new burials in 1853, but its troubles were far from over. In December 1864, during the Civil War, General William Tecumseh Sherman's Union troops occupied Savannah after his infamous March to the Sea. While Sherman gifted the city with cotton and spared it from destruction, his soldiers didn't leave the cemetery untouched. Union troops vandalized Colonial Park Cemetery extensively. They tore headstones from the ground, threw them around the cemetery, and used their bayonets to alter the dates on gravestones. One man's headstone now claims he lived to age 421. His neighbor supposedly lived 544 years. Another man's son was supposedly born 1,000 years before his father. These altered stones still hang on the eastern wall of the cemetery today, a permanent reminder of the disrespect shown to the dead. Many locals believe this desecration is why the cemetery is so actively haunted. The spirits of those whose final resting places were disturbed are now seeking vengeance. Colonial Park Cemetery has become known as Paranormal Central among local investigators. The phenomena reported here are extensive and well documented. In October 2025, local historian Ryan Dunn and his team conducted an audio recording session in the center of the cemetery at 2 a.m. Dunn asked aloud, "Can you tell us your name?" When they reviewed the recording, they captured a clear response, a young girl's voice saying, "Kate." The voice sounded like it belonged to a 5 to 6-year-old child. "We're in the center of the cemetery at 2 a.m., Dunn explained. "There's nobody around, and there's no little kids running around, at least not living, so that was really creepy." Multiple witnesses have reported seeing a glowing green mist floating through Colonial Park Cemetery at night. The mist moves horizontally across the grounds, hovering just above the headstones. It doesn't behave like natural fog. It moves against the wind and seems to have purpose. Tour guides have documented this phenomenon on at least 2 separate occasions in 2025 alone, with guests on the Beyond Good and Evil tour witnessing the mist moving through the cemetery. Towards the back of Colonial Park Cemetery stands what locals call the Hanging Tree. According to legend, a man named René Rondolier was hanged from this tree in the 1800s. Rondolier was nearly 7 feet tall and had a disturbing reputation. As a child, he was known for snapping the necks of small animals. When a young girl was found murdered in Savannah with her neck broken in the same manner, locals immediately suspected Rondolier. He was arrested, convicted, and hanged from the tree in Colonial Park Cemetery, despite maintaining his innocence until his final breath. After his execution, more children continued to die under similar circumstances, suggesting Rondolier may have been innocent. Today, visitors report seeing Rondolier's ghost hanging from the tree, lamenting the injustice of his death. Others claim to see him walking through the cemetery, still searching for vindication. One of the most bizarre phenomena captured on video at Colonial Park is the jumping boy, the ghost of a small child who appears to be chasing something through the graveyard. Multiple visitors have recorded the same apparition, a young boy who jumps up into a tree several feet above his head, impossibly high for a child his size. He'll remain in the tree for several minutes before dropping back down and continuing his chase. The footage has been analyzed by paranormal investigators who cannot explain how the figure achieves such height or why he repeats the same pattern. Perhaps the most commonly reported phenomenon at Colonial Park is the appearance of shadowy figures moving among the gravestones. These aren't vague shapes. Witnesses describe seeing fully formed human silhouettes walking through the cemetery. Some appear to be dressed in Civil War-era military uniforms. Others wear period clothing from the 1700s, 1800s. When approached, they vanish, not by running away, but by simply fading from existence. Tour guides have reported that it's not uncommon for guests to see these figures. Some tours have had multiple people simultaneously witness the same shadowy figure, confirming that these aren't individual hallucinations but shared experiences. Even in Savannah's humid summer heat, visitors to Colonial Park report experiencing sudden, dramatic temperature drops in specific locations. These cold spots are so intense that breath becomes visible, despite it being 90+ degrees outside. Accompanying these cold spots are whispers, voices speaking in the darkness when no living person is present. Some witnesses report hearing their names called. Others hear conversations in languages they don't recognize. A few have heard screaming. Before Colonial Park became a cemetery, part of the grounds served as dueling grounds from 1740 until 1877. Even after dueling was banned, men would come here to settle affairs of honor. One particular grave belongs to James Wilde, who died in a duel in 1815. He was shot in the heart after the fourth exchange of fire by his former friend Roswell P. Johnson. The nature of their dispute is unknown, but it was serious enough that both men were willing to die for it. Visitors to Wilde's grave report feeling overwhelming sadness and anger. Some claim to hear the sound of gunshots echoing through the cemetery at night, the eternal replay of that fatal duel. Perhaps the most unnerving aspect of Colonial Park Cemetery is the pervasive feeling of being watched. Nearly every visitor who enters the cemetery after dark reports this sensation, the absolute certainty that something is observing them from the shadows. Some describe it as malevolent. Others say it feels more curious than threatening. But all agree. You are never alone in Colonial Park Cemetery after dark. What makes Colonial Park's hauntings particularly compelling is the sheer volume of documented evidence. Audio recordings capturing unexplained voices, video footage of the jumping boy and other apparitions, hundreds of witness testimonies from credible sources, physical sensations experienced by multiple visitors simultaneously, photographic evidence of the green mist and shadowy figures. Local paranormal investigation teams have conducted extensive research at Colonial Park using EMF meters, infrared cameras, and audio recording equipment. Their findings consistently show anomalous activity that can't be explained by natural phenomena. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Colonial Park Cemetery is what lies beyond its boundaries. When the city needed more space in 1896, officials decided to make the cemetery smaller by removing many tombstones and reducing its official boundaries. The current fence doesn't accurately represent the original borders of the cemetery. The graveyard once extended halfway across Abercorn Street. This means that when you stand outside the cemetery walls on the surrounding streets, you're technically standing inside the original Colonial Park Cemetery, directly on top of hundreds of forgotten graves. Savannah has earned its nickname, the city that lives upon her dead. Roads, buildings, and sidewalks throughout the historic district are built over old burial grounds. The city literally rests on the bodies of its former inhabitants. Is it any wonder the dead don't rest peacefully here? Colonial Park Cemetery is open to visitors from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily. The grounds are beautiful. Spanish moss hanging from ancient oak trees, weathered gravestones telling stories of Savannah's past, peaceful pathways winding through history. But tour guides will tell you, don't visit after dark, and if you do visit during the day, show respect. Remember that over 10,000 people are buried beneath your feet, most in unmarked graves, many buried alive, all victims of tragedy. Because in Colonial Park Cemetery, the dead are listening, and they remember every disrespect. 7 cemeteries. 7 locations where the dead refuse to rest. From the violent attacks at Greyfriars Kirkyard to the photographic evidence at Bachelor's Grove. From Resurrection Mary's 85 years of hitchhiking to the voices captured at Colonial Park. From the Gateway Legends of Stull to the vampire panic at Highgate. From Marie Laveau's curse that still strikes today. These aren't ghost stories whispered around campfires. These are documented cases with physical evidence, police reports, hospital records, photographs analyzed by experts, audio recordings reviewed by investigators, witness testimonies from cab drivers, police officers, tour guides, and everyday people who saw something they can't explain. Over 500 documented physical attacks at one location alone. Photographs that skeptics still can't debunk decades later. Handprints burned into metal gates. Audio recordings of children's voices where no children exist. Curses that destroy lives within weeks. Memory lapses that steal hours. Electronic equipment that fails on command. The evidence is overwhelming. Something is happening at these places. Something that science can't fully explain and skeptics can't completely dismiss. But here's what we know for certain. Every single one of these cemeteries shares one thing in common: tragedy. Mass death from disease. Torture and execution. Hit-and-run deaths. Desecration of graves. Violence. Disrespect. Forgotten souls. Where trauma occurs, it leaves a mark, an imprint, an echo that refuses to fade. The dead, it seems, remember everything, and some of them aren't finished telling their stories. So here's my question for you. Have you experienced something paranormal in a cemetery? Maybe it was just a feeling, or maybe you saw something you can't explain. Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and who knows? Your experience might be featured in a future video. If this video gave you chills, subscribe and smash that like button. It helps the algorithm show this to more people who are fascinated by the paranormal. And share this with that friend who says they don't believe in ghosts. Let's see if they can explain the bent iron bars, the famous photographs, or the 500 documented attacks. Until next time, remember, respect the dead. They're watching, they're listening, and some of them are still very much here. Stay curious, stay safe, and maybe stay away from cemeteries after dark.